When I was in school, I went to a school called Cooper Union in New York City, and I did not have, it was a school, so I have no debt, which is amazing, and why a lot of the things that I've done since have been possible, because it's the only free school in America, and then recently it decided to institute a sliding scale tuition, and then the students occupied the president's office, and then over the years it's very successful direct action, and I'm very proud of it. I guess I say this partly to say two things. One is that that's where I come from. My politics were in some ways informed by my time at Cooper Union. Also my lack of heavy student debt was given to me as a blessing, as a gift. And I recognize that as a position of privilege that I entered into the workforce with, because not everybody has that, and that's a luxury that we all should have. When I was in school, I did not have any idea whatsoever of what the world of being a professional designer was, right? It was like, in some ways, a mystery. I understood certain aspects of it, like I understood that you worked for a client, and the client interacted with you in a certain way. I understood that there were companies that existed and agencies that existed and so forth. But I didn't really know what it was to run a practice, which is at the time all I wanted to do. I wanted to have authorship, I wanted to like, you know, I feel pretty strongly about some things about running a design studio, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I didn't know what any of it meant. And nobody ever told me. And so, in some ways, what this talk is an attempt to talk to people who are in that position to say, this is what a design studio is, this is how it runs, this is how you make it work, this is how you're going to talk to clients, this is how you're going to write a proposal, and this is what happens when things go bad. If you haven't gotten it yet, I have a sample contract proposal here that people can take and use from in the future. Please rewrite it, it's in my tone of voice, it should be in your tone of voice. But this is another thing that I feel like all the things that are mysterious, that are like mystified, should not be. And maybe this is a holdover from like the era of early letterpress, when it was literally a black art, right? When like people didn't, there was a tightly held cult of information. I think it's also something about the way that we treat money and that we treat business, even though we're in this like hyper-capitalist structure, we don't talk honestly about it. So all this stuff is an attempt to make some of these things open and clear. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those too at the end. In 2008, I started a design studio called Roomhouse. I had been out of school at this point since 2003. That was 5 years of working. Let's see, I took on one job at a quote-unquote design studio. I was fired from it. It was a bad fit. I didn't know that it was possible to quit a job like that. I quit plenty of dumb jobs when I was younger. You know, jobs working at like chicken barbecue, like, this is the side. I'm going to try to keep this 40 minutes, so you flat me. I worked at a job that was in a like, all I got to do was walk these rows, long rows under like a football field kind of tent. And on either side were these chicken grills. You're like mass grilling chicken. And my job was to put this bottle of vinegar and squirt it on the chicken as I walked by. And so as I went, it would be like vinegar squirting. And I had to do this all day long. So I quit jobs before. But I didn't know that I could like, this was like my first career job. And I was like, I can't quit this job. This is my job. It was a bad fit and I should have quit it. Instead, I lasted long enough for them to fire me. And then I spent a few more years not knowing how do you get work. I was like, do you get work on Craigslist? You don't, by the way. I was like, you know, I illustrated a GMAT test prep website math questions. So I had to like, you know, X divided by da-da-da-da, like using illustrations. I say this all, but like, that was 5 years. Like I spent 5 years after I graduated just figuring stuff out. You do not have to expect that you emerge from school into this like beautiful, like clear understanding of what you're doing, what you're about to do. Like that time is, for many, most professionals that I know, that time is a time of like figuring shit out. So it's cool whatever you do next to school, and it's not going to define you, and it's not going to be the thing that you end up doing. But at a certain point, I wanted to form a design studio. I had some friends who were invested in it. That was in New York. I'm now in, when I say invested in it, I don't mean money. I just mean like, we were working together. I now run it. This is my studio now. I only have photographs of my plants. I haven't taken a photo of the actual studio. It's very planty. We are downtown in Chinatown. I was in New York. The studio was in New York from 2008 until 2011, and it's been here since. I'm going to show a little bit of the work that we've done to give you a sense of context. So we've done some editorial work. This is a magazine called Badoon. That's a goat in Uggs. Badoon was a fun project in that it was attempting a very difficult task, which was to have a magazine about the culture of the Middle East. It's a Western magazine produced in New York, I mean, mostly by Persians, but like in New York and of people who live in New York, about the Middle East, knowing that the majority of work that gets done through this lens is inherently skewed. It's like altered by the lens. And so the desire was to not make an object that like spoke with authority, but instead like ate that confusion up, internalized it. And so the outcome was a magazine that constantly changed. So every issue was redesigned. So some issues were bananas like this. Some are very tight and dense and typographic. We struggled for a bit to how to make it into an online presence, because when you have a magazine whose issues have no connection to one another, when everything is fundamentally different, I think people assume that work on the web, interactive work, is a lot more fluid than work in print. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think, for instance, when you work in print, you can very fine-tune control whatever you like. Somebody can go in at the end and you can turn everything sideways. You can do whatever you want within that structure. Within the web, you're working within a series of templates, effectively. So how do you keep this templated thing, like this website, giving it the spirit of this confusion and slipperiness that the magazine had? And our answer was basically to emphasize the images and emphasize the space that you read within, and treat these images as these interventions that would slide into and over and through the space that you're reading within. I start by showing this because the work that we've done has been a split of physical and interactive. I have no real desire to work only in one or the other. I have no necessarily preference. These are two different worlds with their own material needs. Another project, this is an exhibition in CCA, the Canadian Center for Architecture in Montreal. We were asked to design this exhibit. It's called Error 404. It's an exhibit about how physical objects are represented digitally and how digital information gets turned into physical. And so there's this table in the middle of the space. It's a very large octagonal room. And all these objects and information sort of manifestations are placed, the physical stuff on the table. Then there's a website. Now the website has a live cam that's pointed directly at the table, and it's showing you a live feed. And as people are there, they're walking around and they're touching things, and you see it all. And as you move your cursor over an object in the video feed, you get information about that object. And at the same time, in the actual space, your cursor is being projected into the table. So there's mirroring. There's a flattening of the distance between the physical and the digital. And that's another thing that we like to do. Open Signal is an organization in Portland. This is after 5 years of being here, our first Portland client. Wow, the color's a little blown out, but that's a beautiful drink, by the way. Open Signal used to be Portland Community Media. They talked to us about doing a rebrand. We tried to assess what their sort of actual fundamental underlying needs were, which is another thing that we do, is we like to actually figure out what's going on rather than sort of approach the initial assumption and say, okay, here's the solution. A lot of what we heard was that nobody knew or cared about Portland Community Media. And so we thought about what do people know? And what people knew was that it was a holdover from an older time, no longer relevant. And so in rebranding it, we developed this new name, Open Signal, which sort of is both a adjective and a verb. It's a signal that's open, but it's also this command, open the signal up. We worked on a typographic language. Most of our work is very typographic. I'm not personally someone that is driven by the desire to make form work, I guess, or illustrative work. It's just not how I work. You can see this stuff actually happening up on MLK. Open Signal is an awesome organization, and if you ever want to get access to media equipment or rooms to shoot video in, or learn how to edit or how to do VR stuff, it's a great place to learn that, to be involved. And we've done some work doesn't involve a final actual finished product. We've consulted for people. This is some work we did for Unity Technologies. They make this game development platform called Unity. And so they hired us to think about a new kind of software that would sort of onboard, teach people how to use these core concepts. And so these are all, this is from our sketching, our development process. I'm trying, this is really a talk about working more than work. I'm just showing this work more to like give some context, so I'm not gonna linger here. But it is fun. The work we're in some ways most known for is the design direction of a publisher called Verso. Verso is the world's largest, the world's largest radical publisher in the English language is how they build themselves, which is not so snappy, but it's what it is. We've done book series for them. We direct other designers on their covers. We've been doing this for a few years. We've tried to establish a language here that is typographic primarily, and thinks about the objects, the book object, thinks about the content, tries to not say what a thing is, but instead sort of dance around what a thing might be. Okay, that's it. Those are all the pictures I'm going to show. From here on in, it's just a question and answer with myself. So these days, there are 5 of us working right now. There'll be 6 of us this summer. Taryn Howard, the teacher's here, works with you. Let's talk here. So it's a design studio. What do I think a design studio is? I think a design studio is a team, like a small room, a group of people, working together in a coordinated effort on shared goals. Which is to say that I think once you begin having multiple teams that work sort of in isolation, it's not a studio format. The studio for me is about the dialogue and the collaboration. It's about people who discuss everything, who work towards these things together. To that end, we don't have strict roles. I mean, there's 2 developers, and there's a designer, and there's a content strategist, but everybody talks about everything. Everybody's involved in everything. And so this talk is going to be about what that kind of a studio is, and how that kind of a studio runs, and how you might, what it's like to run one. How might you start one? It's called How to Start and Run a Design Studio, and yes, we'll be talking about money. Because money is the answer to effectively every question that somebody has for me about how to run a design studio. That is not because I am in it in a sort of like capricious capitalist way and I want to grow the thing and own the world. It's just that is the answer to things. How do you get good clients? Well, if you had all the money in the world, you could say no to people. And then there you go, now all you have are good clients. Or how do you show your work? Well, you get enough money to create some space and time for you to then very carefully show and talk about your work. All these things, unfortunately, come back to money. As does the big question, what's it take to run a thing? How much does it cost? What's the actual day-to-day cost of running a business like this? But I'm going to start at the beginning. How do you know that it's time to start a studio, start a practice like this? In my experience, it was time when I saw that I could get work occasionally, that it was the work that I was getting was not necessarily the work that I wanted to do forever, but it was interesting enough that it was real, and that I couldn't take on larger projects or bigger work or think about taking on work of that scale unless I had partners, unless I worked with people. That was when I decided. Also, I decided it because me and 2 friends were in a room one day that we shared where we worked downtown in New York. We're you know what? We should just do a design studio. Yeah. And that was how I decided. But, which is all to say that there is not a particular time. I'm not saying it takes X number of years. I kind of think I do think you should have some professional experience before you start a business. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to work at Wyden Kennedy and know what that world is like in order to do it. It just means that before you sort of declare yourself to exist at the scale, know enough about what it means to work at this scale. Know enough about what it is to talk to a client that you're confident that you can talk to a client and that you've done it before. Because the truth is that you're going to end up talking to people a lot. And at the start, you're going to be faking it. And as you continue, you're going to actually know what you're talking about. But you're going to have to fake it with confidence when you start. And if you're not able to fake it with confidence, then probably you're not ready to do this kind of thing. How do you find partners? So I think a studio is inherently built on collaboration. For me and for many of us, that means finding people that share some of your ideas and want to work together. Again, this is a money answer. If you had all the money in the world, you could start an incredible studio with your big amount of money and bring people on and get a cool office. But you don't. And so really we're talking about you and other people working together towards common goals. You share the risk, you share the burden, you have somebody to talk to about when things go wrong. There's somebody in the office that means you can like take a long weekend away. Plenty of business partners are friends, but are not like best friends. Like it does not, a studio, a business, is not necessarily the same as like the people you want to hang out with at night. It's the people that you can work really well with together. I would recommend taking a long trip with somebody if you're thinking about starting a studio. Take a long trip somewhere that's a little bit anxiety-inducing, and like maybe you speak the language and not if you have data, and if you can make it for like the week, that's a really excellent business partner. A partnership agreement is really important, and this is something that's not always talked about. A partnership agreement is when you and your partner, your business partner, began this business. You should, you're not required to, but you should write a partnership agreement that states a few things. It's going to state how you split up money. It's going to state what does hiring look like. It's going to state, and most importantly, it's going to state what happens when it ends. What happens when one person wants to leave? What happens if both or all three people want to leave? What happens if all the money runs out? You do this at the start because you look ahead and know that things are going to get like awkward. I had partnership agreements with my partners so that when my partners left the studio, we were like, oh, we have this stupid document. It says exactly what we're going to do. This is great. And now I'm going to their wedding in a week. Like, that's why. And if we didn't have that partnership agreement, we would not be speaking. I'm serious. Like, think about this on it's a business. There's a level of like complication that comes with running a business. And some of that complication is like bullshit. And some of it is smart. Some of it is about like being intelligent about decisions you make now because they're going to be necessary later on. How do you choose a name? I think for some people this is the most fun because it's like when you're like going to start a band and you're like hang out, choose the name of your band, you practice it. It's not dissimilar. Know that the name is effectively meaningless, right? It almost doesn't matter. The studio's name is Rumors. Do you think that's brought me clients? It has not. On the other hand, it is easy for me to say 10 times a day, like Rumors, this is Andy. Like it doesn't matter, it's a sound, it becomes a sound. Stay away from things though that people are going to be like. A friend of mine started a studio called Quit, or was going to start a studio called Quit, and I was like, that's not a good name, really. There are some bad names, but there aren't really amazing names. Whatever sounds good to you. To make it official, you need to make it real. It's not just enough to be like, I'm a business. You actually go to City Hall, you apply for a business license, you give them the name of your business, they tell you, oh, there's already another business that has that name. Like, my friends wanted to be named Authentic, and so then it's fine. They went into City Hall, and they did the papers, and they're like, you know, there's another Authentic, you're going to need to have, like, an official name. You can still do business as whatever this name is, but, like, your official name on checks needs to be something unique. And they're like, okay, Authentic Business Company. And so now on the checks, Authentic Business Company, which I love, I believe in it. All right, how do you find work? This is obviously, I think, at the core of where, for me anyway, before I started the studio, a lot of what I wanted to know and did not know is how do you find work. And what I have learned since is that you don't find work, you just don't. Like, work has to find you. And that's sort of a frustrating thing to think about or be told. And so there is a follow-up. Work finds you because people know who you are. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have fame. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have like this demonstrated big expertise and you're on the internet, you talk and talks, and you're like, I want to work with that person. It means that you know people. You have a reputation or you have an established network, and when somebody needs work done, whether they are a person that's hiring or whether they are the friend who like has too much work and wants to give somebody work, people know who you are. And that's just the fact. Like if you exist in a vacuum, you will not, it's impossible to take part in this kind of work because this kind of work is about the interaction between people and ideas. So this brings up the question of how to network. And I have some strong feelings about this. When I got out of school originally, I burned some bridges when I got out of school. I was like, I happened not to love the community that I was sort of like being presented into, like the sort of New York design scene at that time. I never felt particularly comfortable with the AIGA and other like organizations like it. That's not to say that they don't like they don't offer things. It's just like I had this kind of like distance from it. And I therefore refused to like meet people because I was really cool, and I was like, I don't need to meet people, and I'm just gonna like hang out with my friends, and I'm gonna like be curious about how people find work. And then over time, what I have learned is that networking is not networking, right? Like this idea of like networking that everybody despises and is ridiculous is fundamentally not what I mean when I think about networking. Really what I'm thinking about, and why I don't actually use the word networking that often, is that I think about like community building, right? I exist within a community. I exist within a community of people that make things, or enjoy things, or are invested in things, or are doing work in other fields entirely outside of my field. This is a community I exist within, and I am naturally curious. And I like knowing what people do. And I want to talk about what people do. And I frankly want to talk a little bit about what I do, but I mostly want to talk about what other people do. You're already doing this work. You are already doing the work that is actual networking. And the work that people tell you is networking, you can like ignore and not do it. You can. You don't have, the thing that like makes you like hate to network is great because it's terrible. All that this is about is being a human being talking to other human beings. That's it. And when you meet people that are not human beings, when you meet people that are like snake people, that's great. You don't even need to build that connection. That is not a community member. It isn't. It's not a community member. You're part of a community and you should feel that way and grow it. Be curious and do not be an asshole. That's really, those are the things. That's it. Okay. I would say, surprisingly, you stop feeling like a fraud once you are comfortable being a fraud. That's it. It's very straightforward. You're gonna be a fraud, and then at some point you're like, yeah, I'm kind of a fraud, and then it's fine. Like another way to put it is that you're gonna be comfortable being a fraud once you feel comfortable faking it. Because once you feel comfortable faking it, you can walk into any room and somebody can ask, like, do you do this, or can you do this, or are you good at this, and you're gonna say yes. And in the back of your mind, you're like, I gotta teach myself how to do that thing. And once you're there, that's it. You're no longer a fraud, you're a professional. So that's it. I tell people, when people ask me whether they should show in their portfolio like fake work, like, you know, I did this in school for a hypothetical client, like, should I show this? Often I say no, frankly, because of it depends where you are. If you are straight out of school, for sure. Like you're starting to build the way that you talk about work through showing work that you've been doing, and it's impossible to assume that you have the experience that you wouldn't have had a chance to have. Maybe 3 years down the line, I would try to like move that away from work that you did in school towards work that you've done for actual things, or, well, I'll talk about this later. I'm not gonna give all my, it's gonna come. We're gonna talk about portfolios. I only mention this to say, when that Verso books that I've done all this work for, I knew who they were. I wanted to work for them. I already read their books. It was like, that was a community that I wanted to be invested in. And I was at a party one day. Many of my stories, like I was at a party one day. I was blitzed, but I was not blitzed. Somewhat sober, and somewhat not. And I met the managing director of Verso Books. And I was so excited to meet him. And I was like, oh man, I'm a book designer. I'd love to work with you. And he's like, he's British, I'm not gonna bother with the accent, but he's like, oh, you know, okay, come on in tomorrow and like show me your work. I was like, great. And so then I went home and I like made 10 book covers because I had no book covers. And I like very quickly just did some things and I brought them in a book and he just like flip, yeah, sure, okay. Like, here's the book cover that you're gonna do. Because in a lot of instances, that kind of connection, it really is more about like being a human being and also feeling comfortable faking. Okay, what is an RFP? So there's basically two ways to get jobs, two ways I get jobs. One way, the ideal way, is that a client knows who you are, is like that person possesses a certain expertise, and I want to work with them. And they approach you directly, and they say, I really want to work together on this thing. And then that's better because you get to build the thing early on, build the idea of the thing, to say like, well, what are you trying to do? Like, what's the actual problem? And you can sort of sort out the needs. And then suddenly you have this like joint framework that you're building the structure on top of together. The other way, and much more common way for me anyway, is for a client to know who you are or to be referred to you by somebody else and ask you to respond to an RFP, which is a request for proposals. And they'll have sent this out to other studios, other designers. Sometimes I would say like, I always ask when I get sent, like, how many people are you speaking to? And if it's like 6, that's normal. A dozen is too many. I've been told 20, which is, I did not even bother. It's like, what's the point of this? You don't even know what you want. But you get this brief that somebody has written, where frankly, 9/10 of the time, they don't know what they're talking about. And I mean that with like a generosity in my heart. Like if I wrote something for an architect, like here's my brief for the house that I want to build. And I'm like, I want all the windows, and I want like the movie theater, and like, 4 garages, like they don't all have to face the same way. And the person who got it is like, this is literally impossible. So that's okay. It is okay to receive a document that somebody has written that you can assess and know is not fulfilled. And we'll talk about how to work with that in a minute. But when you get the RFP, I want to say this one thing. It is very common when you're starting out, when you're a young studio, a young professional doing your thing, to compete on price. First off, you're going to naturally compete on price because you're younger and you're smaller, and if you happen to be bidding against White and Kennedy, don't worry, they'll be more expensive than you. You're already competing on price. You might want to further compete on price by cutting costs down to this real minimum. This is I can get this by offering this low amount, but it's bad for many reasons. It's bad because it's bad for the community, right? It's bad for other professionals because you're setting this bar of cheapness that then becomes established. It's bad because you simply are going to resent it, you can't do it, and the work's not going to be good, and you're going to have to take on other work, and then that work is going to compete. It's going to be bad news. And it's bad because you will forever be cheap in the eyes of that client. And everything that you should be doing, especially when you're starting out, is thinking about building a relationship with the client. It's you're starting into a long-term relationship, because if they're not a good client, you don't want to work with them anyway. If they're a good client, the intent is to keep working with them. Don't start off by saying, oh, I'm too expensive, I'm just going to cut this in half, it's a little discount weekly. I did that and it's no good. You have to have a different way to distinguish yourself. It cannot be cost over. Okay. So how do you distinguish yourself? Before you write the proposal, you ask a lot of questions. You write back and you say, thank you for sending this to me. I'd like to have this time to talk to the stakeholders in the project, or you can ask in a different way. You can say, hey, who sent this? And who ends up deciding who you're going to work with? I need to set up time to talk to them. I have a bunch of questions. You schedule time to talk. You take the RFP. You read it line by line. You annotate very intensely, everything you see that you have questions about. And by questions, I don't just mean you're oh, how many of these things do I need to make? A question is oh, you say that you're the world's, the nation's largest independent college for architecture and art. What does that mean? Who else is out there? Ask questions about the context. Ask questions about the people. What you're demonstrating is that you are invested and you're thoughtful, but also that you are not going to just say yes. Because nobody that you want to work for is actually looking for somebody who is just going to say yes. That kind of a person is a bad client. And I swear to you, it doesn't seem like you want to weed out clients right now. I have no clients. You want to weed out those clients. You'd be happier doing whatever you're doing right now to have a stable living situation. You'll be happier doing that for the moment until you get a good client than you will be working for a tyrant. Working for a petty Napoleon. Just try when you ask these questions to them, demonstrate that you're pushing back a little. And I'm not saying that you're challenging fundamentally. You're just oh, what does that mean? Why is that the case? Be invested when this is even before you read the proposal. This is in a phone call. You're talking to these people and you're trying to demonstrate your interest and trying to learn, frankly. You need to be curious and not an asshole. All right, how do you write the proposal? So that's what this document is. This is actually a mix of documents because I wanted to a little bit demonstrate ways that you could professionally be a professional. You can pass that now. Okay. Yeah, you pass them out now. You can read it while I speak.
There you go.
Okay. Big picture, big basic picture. And I'm going to start, in fact, with an estimate. An estimate that you can send to somebody is here is what I'm hearing you say. Here is a range of costs it might take. On the small side, it could be this. Medium size, it could be this. Big size, it could be this. The estimate is not even it's not a proposal. It's are we on the same page? And in fact, it is a good opportunity to sticker shock somebody. Much better to sticker shock somebody early on than for them to read the stupid proposal and then be that makes no sense. You do not have to send out estimates. I don't send out estimates that often, but know that they're different from a proposal. A proposal is where you restate what you've heard. You talk about the ideas, and by this I do not mean the solutions, but the ideas that have come to you. Ideally. You show the structure of the work that you're going to engage in. You list the price. That's a proposal. You can do it any of a number of ways. What I have here is the way that I do it for a certain scale job. In fact, this is kind of a small, I try to find a job that was not huge, that had multiple components, that also had web and physical, so that I could kind of, hit this from a few different angles. That is not the only way to write a proposal. There's plenty of proposals out there. But those are the things that you're going to have to get to.
How do you price a job? Okay, you price it higher than you're going to price it. You price it higher than you think. So something to keep in mind early on is like, what's the value of the job at the client? If somebody's coming with you and they have like, it's like very clearly a small thing, it is a postcard or it is a album cover. Often these are things that have a very particular budget associated with it that you can suss out by talking to friends, because the actual value of it, like the economic value of it, is pretty much right there. It's not huge. If somebody is coming to you for a new logo and a new identity, the value of that is pretty significant. And so the price, even if, hypothetically, even if like the amount of time you're going to spend on an album cover and the amount of time that you're going to spend on a logo, let's say hypothetically they're the same, the like, if you lower the cost of the logo to the cost of the flyer, like you have given up all control over this over the long run. You've shown yourself to be really, really cheap. Okay, that's a ballpark. Ask yourself, what risk am I taking on? Like how much, what stands to be lost if this goes wrong? Therefore, how much time and mental energy am I going to have to put into it? How much control am I going to have to exercise? Whatever. Eventually, you'll have a good feeling, a good gut feeling over how much something should cost. But at the start, take the price that you think it should be, and then multiply by 1.5, a factor of 1.5, 150%. Then add 15% to that. That's the price that you should put into this proposal. And I say this for a couple reasons. One is that when you start off, you are fundamentally going to be undercharging. I've been doing it 10 years and I still undercharge. All the time I undercharge. Because I have a hesitation about like associating money of a certain scale with the work that I do. And what ends up happening is that the person who sort of reached that money is one person who runs this company. It's that individual. And so take the money back from that individual because they have enough money as is. I say add 15% for one reason. And it's because, and you don't have to do this, and I don't do this so much anymore, but early on it was really useful. I would always add 15%. Because when a client would come back to me, they'd say one of two things. They would say either this is way more than we can afford, which is fine, which is totally fine, because it means that there's a big gap between what they think this should cost and what it should cost. That happens all the time. People come to us for like really complicated websites, like I have $12,000. Like that's going to take 9 months of work. Like we're just not going to be able to do that. That happens all the time. The other thing that they might say is they might say like, this is close, it's like a little bit more expensive, or like, can you come down a little bit? At this point, you have one of two options. You can change the scope of the work to take out certain things and say, why don't we change what this is going to look like, and then it'll be this much money. Or, if you've added 15%, you can be like, I can knock off 15% for you. The danger here is that then they're going to look for you to knock off 15% in the future. This is just, it's like a padding. That's one way to do it. Because you know that people will come back to you, this is just what I do. If I have a certain job, I'm like, man, that's a little bit more money than I thought it would be. Like, where can we find out a way to squeeze? If you've already padded, you have that option. The other way to approach it, though, and this is something that a lot of people like emphasize strongly, is like never just cut money off the top, only like change the scope of a project. Okay, I'm going to offer you a third way. The third way is if somebody says this is more money than they want to spend, it means that you did not early on talk about money. You didn't talk about money early enough. Ideally, you talk about money very quickly. You say like, oh, this project sounds like, I haven't looked it over, but it sounds like it's in the range of X to X. And then they respond. You can also say, what's your budget? But everybody wants to like answer on what their budget is. They never like to say it. It's very frustrating. It also, in the end, will lead to like a lower price often because they're going to say what a lower price is, and you're like, okay, what can we do for that amount of money? They always have more money. This is the nature of like billing and financing a job. If you think the value of the job is this, go for that. Like that's the value. That's what you should be shooting for. And if it's way lower, then it means that there's a gap in the understanding. All right, how do you write a contract? I have some legalese in this document at the end of the proposal. There's plenty of stuff. AIGA has a big like blockbuster contract that you can work from. It's way more complicated than it should be, I think, for small projects. Like if you're working on a small project for somebody, you know, it's like, I say small, and at this point, this to me is small. When I was starting out, this would not have been small. If I was getting paid $6,000 to do a project that would take me a couple months, and I send them this like 15-page like legal document, there's like it's overwhelming. Like, you don't actually need that much in a contract. You need to state what the terms are, what happens if somebody wants to end it. You can use this text, you can write your own or find your own. If you're gonna write your own, talk to a lawyer. BT you should all, by the way, once you have enough money, you should have a lawyer. Like, that's it. Lawyers and accountants actually save you money and pain. You know, they're professionals just like you are. Should you work for free? I know a lot of people say no to this sort of as like a punch. I'm gonna say no. My gut is that I say no if somebody is making money off of it. If like they're a for-profit organization and they're gonna profit and they want me to like put my labor into it and then they want to take the money that they took from my labor and they're just gonna make that, then no. The answer is no. Frankly, I think that extends to internships, but I know that that's hard to manage sometimes. I'm much more sympathetic to the students who have to take on free unpaid internships than I am to the people who offer the free unpaid internships. I'm on your side. I still don't think you should do it, but I totally understand. If it's a cause that you would already be volunteering your time for, if it's like something that you would treat as a volunteer opportunity of a different sort, like maybe you would give your time working for this organization stuffing envelopes or like walking the street, then it becomes a different thing, right? That's like a different idea of work. But if somebody, and okay, if it's your mom, you know, you work for your mom, sure. If it's your aunt, though, why not? I would say probably not. I would, unless you're very close. Okay, what's your salary? So this is a tricky thing to answer, and not tricky because I think it's awkward to talk about, although it is, and I still like, I'm like, okay, I'm talking about money. It's tricky because what I run is called an S corp. Take a sip. And an S corp, the long and short, means that the income is passed through, so that money gets paid to the business, and I am the sole owner of this S corp, and it would be split if there were two. That money is effectively like goes straight to me, and I'm taxed on that money. Instead of having to pay like the business pays tax here, and then I get salary, I pay tax on my salary. In order to do that, I have a very low salary, which is $36,000 a year, and then I take partner draws on top of that. Those partner draws are not regular, because it's not exactly a salary, but it does give me the flexibility to like, I'll be honest, there are times when it's like, I don't know if I'm gonna make payroll, and therefore I'm definitely not gonna get paid this month. You have that flexibility to like elide payment. Over the past 2 years, I have made between $80,000 and $90,000 a year. I have looked on Glassdoor, the creative director on, you know, like average salary I think is $130,000. So I eyeball that and I'm like, well, I'm trading off this amount of money to do exactly what I want, and I'm okay with that because $90,000 is fine. You know, you also, I guess you have to ask yourself like really what do you want, but like $90,000, I can make that happen. Yeah, I trade off money. How much does it cost to run the studio for me? Okay, this is a weird question, I think, because when I added up these numbers, I was shocked by how much it was. I'm not, like I said, I have an accountant. I'm not the best with numbers. I don't really think about it. It turns out, so there's 5 employees, myself included, 5 people. It costs $40,000, $35,000 to $40,000 a month to run the studio. That includes my income, includes everybody's incomes. The average salary at the studio, I think right now would be $70,000. We're like this, basically. Like everybody's paid close, not the same, but very close to one another. Then you have taxes, and you have rent, and you have travel for work, and you have like, you know, we have sparkling water. We live large. You know? So it adds up, money adds up. It is expensive. It turns out that it's expensive. One thing though about putting money into, well, for one, I think people should be paid well. I think you shouldn't be trying to maximize people's like labor and minimize their pay. I think you should be figuring out what is a healthy balance for people. And so therefore things cost money. Because things cost money, because it's expensive, it helps you charge the right amount of money to clients because you have no alternative. In some ways, it's very helpful to know that things are costly, because then when you say to a client, I can do this website for $5,000, you're basically saying, I will live without this money for a period of time. Like, I'm going to cut into what I need to operate. Over time, you will find that you are able to easily make that exchange and trade-off in your head. You're much easier to say, like, this is going to be 3 months, studio costs around this much money. At first, it may be very helpful to say, what do I need to make per year? What do I need to make per month? How many months is this work going to take? How many other projects am I going to do at the same time? You can calculate what you need to make. You should not be charging that amount. You can just calculate what the baseline is that you need to make. How many hours do you work per person per week? At the studio, we work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and that's it. Some people might want to come a little late, leave a little late, come a little late, leave a little early. That is the nature of what we do. I have a studio because I get to make the studio culture. Like, that's what I want. I want a studio culture where people stay until 7 or 8 at night. That's what you get. When you have a studio, you can do whatever you want. I would encourage you to think about the people that you work with. Whatever. You're not employing people right now. But no. No. That when you employ people, like, just be a human and don't be an asshole. This is all it comes back to. I have strong feelings about the design industry being run by, does anybody know, what's it, Maslow's pyramid of self-actualization, right? I've met a lot of self-actualized designers, and they're fucking jerks. Like, there's a sense of entitlement and self-direction and control that they possess that extends to humans, and I think it's garbage. And I want to emphasize that you're not a human garbage, you're a human, and you get to create a world for humans. Okay, that, and I'm going to note, that doesn't exactly apply to me. So, at the studio, if somebody we've had it where somebody had to work a weekend day, and so they just should take a day off the next week. I will end up working weekends and I will end up working nights. And I will do this because I stand to benefit in a different way than the people that work for me. Hypothetically, somebody was once like, when you stop this, you gonna sell it? I was like, sell what? Like myself? Like, what is there to sell, right? So I don't know what this hypothetical payout is at the end. But I still benefit because it's mine, and it's my name that's associated with it. And over time, it accumulates a kind of value that is not just financial, but that is still mine. And I therefore invest in it in a different way. That I think it's actually kind of fair that I might want to invest in it in a certain way, that others should not be invested in a certain way. I'm sorry, I'm quite late. I know this. I can rush, but I'm not gonna. How do you avoid bad work? Okay. Ideally, you have so much work coming in that you can say no to people easy. You can just be like, no, I'm not doing that. And that's how you avoid bad work. But that's not realistic. It's not the case for us. The first thing that you do is you try not to work with snake people. So when somebody comes to your work and you talk to them and you ask them some questions and you're like, well, internally, how do you structure X, Y, and Z? And who's going to manage this? And what's the last project that happened? You just get a read. You get a read on whether they're decent or not. And if they're not, you might still want to work for them, honestly. But if they're fundamentally bad people, you can step away gracefully. That's one way to avoid bad work. The other way to avoid bad work is to get good work. And so, okay, how do you get good work? The core of this, only show the work that you want to do. You have a portfolio. You've got plenty of stuff. You think you should show all the stuff you have because maybe that one thing was real and that one thing got some attention. But you don't want to do that? Don't show it. Only show the work that you want to do. That is how, over 10 years, you cultivate exactly the work, not even 10. That's how over 2 years, you cultivate exactly the work that you want to do. Only show that work. And then build direct relationships with people that are built on open and honest dialogue, blah, blah, blah. And as a project is winding down, tell somebody, this was great, I really enjoyed this collaboration. Let me know what's coming up for you. And then check in with them 3 months later. And again, you're not doing this in sort of clockwork fashion because it's time to write the client and say hello to the client. You're doing it because you are trying to build relationships with people that you like. And you want to check in, and you want to see how that thing you made is doing because you're invested. That's how you get good work. You stay in touch, you work with good people, you show the work you want to do. How do you show your work? So this can vary depending on the kind of work that you want to do. The kind of work that I want to do is not so much form image-based, and so I find it a little trickier to show the work because let's say that I was a poster maker, that was my vibe was stuff that gets shared on Tumblr, right? Which, by the way, there's no clients for that. But let's say that's what I wanted to do. I could just show pictures of the work, and then people would understand the work that I did because that's the outcome. But I don't. And it's much harder for me to show the work because the work that I do and that I like to do is about process and it's about ideas. Therefore, I have to use words. And so it's harder because nobody reads on the internet. So you're using words in a context where nobody wants to read the words. I would say that you should try to figure out how to condense the story as clearly as possible so that when people like at a glance look at a thing, they understand the core meaning that you're trying to put out, rather than think, oh, this person makes these things, I'm going to buy myself one of those things. That is, again, if you do the kind of work that I do, there's all kinds of work being done in the industry. It's totally different if you're an illustrator. Okay. How do you describe your services? Okay, I would say it's a lot easier to get work, to keep work, and to charge the right amount of money for work if you can demonstrate your expertise in something. The formula is a little bit like I do X for Y, right? I do websites and interactive experiences for companies who are working within community organizations. You know, like I design magazines for arts organizations and airlines. The cleaner that you can like carve this thing, the easier it is to talk to people who fit within their expertise and to demonstrate that you're a good fit for them. They see themselves in you. The broader you make it, you might be getting more jobs, but you're like, I'm a designer, like I do all kinds of design work for all kinds of people. You're like, which I have done repeatedly, is like not gonna bring in a lot of good stuff. It's gonna bring in people like, okay, well, I have a salsa company, and I have like a salsa bottle, I need salsa, and you're like, I don't want to do that. Figure out what you want to do, figure out how to describe it specifically, figure out who you want to do it for, and try to offer it in that way. I talked about this. Let the bad clients slip away. Oh, this is good. True. The one crazy trick, I'm going to tell you, this is not even a lie, this is not an exaggeration, I'm not being ironic, I'm not about to like, yucky, I'm just going to have a sip. Every client problem that you're going to encounter, outside, if they're good people, not bad people. Again, bad people, bad faith people, bad operators, they're going to try to fuck you over. They're going to try to steal your labor. Don't work with them. Good people that you're working with, every encounter you're going to have that's actually a problem is going to be because of how they are thinking ahead of themselves. Every single thing. What you say, no matter what's coming up, you say, I hear you, that's a good point, but I want to make sure we talk about the goals before we talk about the solutions. That's it. Talk about the goals before we talk about the solutions. That's the thing that you say, and they're like, you're right, we need to go back to the goals. Because if you keep going back to the goals that you've already discussed, that have already been established, you are redirecting things away from these like bad situations where somebody wants to do something stupid towards like, what are we actually trying to do? That's at the core of it. And in fact, the core of it there is saying, I value this collaboration. I share with you the same vision, the same goal. Let's talk about what that goal is again, and let's make sure that we're hitting that goal. Because they can convince you that you're right. You might be the one that's wrong there, but you're not, often. Well, okay, when you fuck up, I mean, this is pretty straightforward. First, you should actually check your contract and make sure that there's no, like, you know, what's the responsibility? Like, are you, at this point, you will have known your contract. By the way, when you give your contract out, make sure you know what those terms are. Don't just send that out and then somebody's like, you promised that you would pay me back 3/4 of the money. You're like, shit. That's a legal term, I didn't know, and I signed off on it, so, okay. When you fuck up, first check the contract. Then tell the client what happened. Acknowledge, the first thing you do is say, this is what happened, this is why it happened. The why part, like, honestly, if you, like, were sleeping or something, like, don't say that. But, like, just be like, it's on us. You know, this is what happened, this is on us, here's what we want to do about it. In that same bulk, you problem and solution. The solution can be, often the solution is free work, frankly. I would say, when you think about how much free work to do, offer enough free work to make up for it, but not so much that you resent the fact that you offered that free work. Because that can often happen. Because then you're suddenly stuck in a worse situation. Just acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it. How do you fire a client? Okay, so leaving a project midstream is very hard, sometimes impossible depending on the contract, but leaving a client relationship is totally doable. And there's a few ways to do it. Often, we're leaving a client relationship because it's literally my studio, I'm not using this like ridiculous royal weed. It's like room weed. Like Tony Robbins. I leave a client relationship because they're good people, I like them, but what they want and what we're trying to do, like, no longer are seeing eye to eye. Like, we're trying to work on bigger projects, and we're trying to, like, establish ourselves as people that don't work at a certain scale, and that's what they need, is they need work at a certain scale. And I like them. And so I'm pretty honest. Like I say, here's where we are right now, we need to focus on jobs that X, or we're stuck. Because we're doing this work, we're no longer offering maintenance services on this work, but they're good people, and just be honest with the good people. If you dislike them, you can say as little as possible. You're just like, this is great, we're too busy, really can't do it, I haven't time for this. Thanks, no, just bow out, like you would like somebody asking on a date, and you're just like, I don't want to follow this one. Which I haven't had to do for a while. And frankly, that was never possible. If they're bad, or if they're cruel people, burn the bridge. Just burn the bridge. Just be like, you can tell other people not to work for them. You can say to their face, like, I hate you. This is ridiculous. And I've done that. Not saying I hate you, but I have definitely burned bridges. I've definitely been very straightforward, because those are bad people. That's the end of it. I don't need to treat them as, they're snake people, I don't need to treat them as snake. We're real close to the end, so I'm gonna condense some of this. How do you manage a project? I would say that managing a project is really about managing expectations. It's about managing expectations on the part of the client. It's about managing your expectations. And so there's two things that you should be doing. One, you should be looking sort of at the end, like what has to happen at the end, and then sort of like working backwards to understand what are the milestones to get there. But two, you should be saying up front, here are the unknowns, or here are certain things we see that are coming up, or this is what our goal is to do X, Y, or Z. One thing that we're doing now is we're no longer setting very specific like end dates for things, like here's a deliverable, here's the date. This is especially for interactive work, which is most of what we do, because things constantly change, right? Like the content changes, and the goals change, and like somebody, the organization changes. It's just happening all the time. So now what we do is we try to work forwards, where we say we're going to work this. We estimate that this work is going to take X number of sprints. We say 2 weeks, 2-week pushes. We define our goal, we work towards it. This is for the advanced lecture. I'm going to hold off to this to the advanced. Like, it's a little complicated. Sorry, that seems so pandering. But mostly it's going to take me 10 minutes to explain, and I don't want to keep you this so long. The point being, though, that I try to acknowledge early on that there are things that we don't know, and there's complications that are going to happen. And that what we're doing here is not like a cut and dry thing where it's like, yes, I will be able to, I know that I can produce X number of widgets per hour, and therefore if the me factory is running 5 days a week, I can produce for you by the end of the week 200 widgets. That's often not what you're doing. And what you're doing is something that's a little bit more slippery. And so you have to convey that early on. You have to, and you don't need to make a big deal. You're just like, here are some unknowns. Here's what we're looking at. When something comes to you that's an unknown, you're like, oh, this is new information. Let me take a moment and think about how this affects the project and get back to you. You can change, at that point, you can say that there's a clause in this contract that calls for additional work outside the scope of the project. If something is given to you that's outside the scope that you agree to, you could say, this is additional work. I think it'll probably cost this much money. It's hard. Honestly, hiring people is hard. Hiring people in Portland I find particularly difficult. Not because of the lack of talent, but because I think Portland is an agency town, and the agencies that are here are very big and very dominant, and they often are paths that people want to go on, and I totally get it. It is a little bit more open in other cities where there aren't the big design employers or big agencies like White & Kennedy or Nike, but instead there's a lot more different size of things. I would say that hiring, all this talk comes back to is be a good person. You don't like people, and when you like people, I will say this about hiring people. I have only ever hired people when it made no sense to hire, and that's because, for better or for worse, those are the times when I met people that I wanted to work with. And I was like, oh, we should work together. I have no idea where money's going to come in the next month, but maybe you come in this month, we can talk about it. And I trust that the reason that I try to hire is because I'm going to be doing better work, and the studio is going to live better as a whole, and so I trust that the money will work itself out. Find people who are self-directed and articulate and kind. If they're not a bad person, just be quick and don't ask them out for coffee to fire them, because then you're in a situation where you say over coffee and you sit there for 5 minutes drinking coffee. It's very uncomfortable. If they are bad people, you don't have to tell them why they're fired. If you are hypothetically firing somebody who is a super casual misogynist, you don't have to make that a big point of articulation. You can just say, this isn't working out, and when they ask you why, you're like, it's not a good fit. This is very difficult. I would say that changing what you're doing is about slowly pivoting and about finding the work that you've been doing recently that you can reframe in a different light, and then talking about that work in that light, so that more and more you can make it seem like you have the expertise in this thing you want to be doing. Whew, how do you stop? I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to stop because I'm not an agency that's going to be bought. I am not a I'm not going to scale up to the point where I'm going to become that kind of business that's going to be bought. Projects that come in are all stacked in different ways, so it's not like all the projects end at the same time, and I can be like, oh man, I'm done, I finally am finished. I literally have no idea how to stop working. That's the thing with like every designer. Oh, and also, you know, we have no pensions or anything, so we like the idea that you're gonna have this huge retirement savings. Anyway, so I don't know how to. Thanks.